Culture was produced by an architect, not a film producer, following the studio culture, and as such it was designed as a forum, a tool to spark educational discussion, which is what we'll be doing today. Thank Lindy Osborne, a senior lecturer here, Phil Crowther, head of design discipline of architecture, Michael Lepre, ex-president of Architects Anonymous, and Grant Chapman, which we'll have to see later on. He will be here for the discussion, we hope. But for now, we'll sit back and enjoy the film Architecture.
The role of presentation when it comes to crits. So sometimes you have crits that are far more casual, where you have just tracing paper on walls, and then you have other presentations where everything's perfect and immaculate. So what are your thoughts about the importance of presentation in our crits? The importance of how polycylinders look and so on.
My process is paramount. Not so fast where you get to. I'm really interested in what you're doing and how you get there, because you need to be learning the process. By the time you're graduating from the Masters, I'm less interested in your process. I'm much more interested in your product. What have you actually finally designed? Because by then, if we've done our work properly, and you've done your work properly, you've built the processes that get you there. So in early years, I want to see process, so flashy, beautiful, glossy renders and things, and nice finished models at the end of the project, much, much less important. Whereas in final year, I do want to see the quality of your presentation. And I think that is the place where crits are important. We're not anti-crit, I'm anti-crit being ubiquitously used everywhere for everything. I think it's very important towards the end of the course that you can present your work with a bit of a, not sales pitch, but with a professional presentation. But I think quality of drawings and physical models, really important in the latter years. In the early years, I'm not more interested in process and Paul.
I didn't know what you were going to ask.
Well, just, I mean, Phil always sets me up for to have a go, but there's the notion of what do we mean by the quality of a model? I mean, I think it's worth thinking about, because, I mean, Lindy alluded to it. I mean, a process model, which is, describes, your design, is a really good model. So, and the quality of that might be high, but it might not be a professional looking model, which might be where you're getting to. So your master's output might be much more geared to the way that you'll be presenting as a professional. But in your first year project or your second year project, it's still about quality. In my view, everything you do should be thinking about how well can I do something within the purpose of what I'm doing. Because so I'd say that every line you draw should be, even if it's a fast line, it should be quality. You should be thinking about, is it a thin line, is it a fat line, and what is it representing? So I've put that out there as thinking about what we mean by it, because there's a whole range of quality.
How do you see the change and transition from some of the education into the actual profession? I think maybe Mike or Grant, you may have, yeah, you both had experience studying recently, and also...
I mean, a number of issues. One is that to become an architect takes 7 years, 5 years at university and 2 years of for want of a better word, internship in a practice. And there are lots of skills and there are lots of higher level thinking knowledge involved, and responsibilities about what you learn at uni and what you learn in the workplace move around. One of the things I always say to employers is, well, I'm not training you employees. I'm training competitors of the future. I think at university it's more important that we train you with high-level cognitive thinking skills and develop that tenacity and that passion, because that's much less likely to be developed in the workplace. And I think it's our responsibility. So digital, whether or not you're skilled up in digital tools is important, but less important to us than kind of dealing with issues that are operate at a much higher level. I think having digital skills is important and certainly a big employability plus. But it's a small factor in a much broader, more complex picture about what an architectural education should be.
So just following on from what Phil is saying, is that we're training you to think as architects and to think as designers, and we're not training you to be draftspeople. So that may be the initial place where you actually start out in employment, is actually in a drafting position, but we're training you to design, not to necessarily drawing skills. So that there is quite a big differentiation between the two. And coming back to the physical model making, what we see a lot of students doing here is actually producing a model of their design at the end of the process. And I mean, I would argue that it's far more beneficial to your understanding of the design process and developing your design ideas is to use model making as a mechanism to actually design. So it's actually a working model. It might not actually look beautiful at the end, but it's something that actually helps you to design form or three-dimensional space. And that can be a really powerful tool, rather than, particularly when you're starting out, you might be battling with transitioning from a two-dimensional medium to a three-dimensional medium. So that was wonderful, and I would like to see a lot more models happening.
I worked for a couple of years in a small architecture firm, and when they mentioned the film that about universities preparing students for work in architecture, I guess it's a really hard thing I think to do. But there is a massive difference in architecture school and architecture work, and I found that, I mean, especially I guess starting out as a graduate or as an undergraduate student working, you're not going to get to do the exciting things that you get to do at university. That will come later, hopefully, for some people. But it's definitely a wake-up call to actually, when you actually go out there in the industry and work. And I think it is important for students to actually, before they graduate, get some at least work experience before they do graduate, because it is different out there. And I think that it's hard to prepare students for that. And I think without them actually going out and experiencing what it is an architect does day in, day out, you're never going to actually get that in the School of Architecture at university. So I think that it's vitally important that everyone goes out there and does that at some stage, even just a couple of weeks on a holiday, if you know somebody you can try and get some work experience with. Because that's when you know, okay, this is kind of what happens, and do I actually want to study this for 5 years? Correct?
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I work at a small architecture practice as well, and I think that uni here has prepared me for that. And part of that is because you don't really you can never understand the day-to-day of working in architecture unless you're there. But you sort of develop a tenacity at uni with what you're doing, and you still sort of have that passion for design and the, I guess, attention to detail thing, whatever the definition of that is, but that really does carry over into practice. So if you're struggling to get a job and you're still, over the desk really believing in what you're doing, like it is actually going somewhere. So I believe, back yourself on that, and you will get it into practice. And practice these days, I've found they really appreciate the tech skills that we get. I'm obviously a mature student, but I did a trade as well. I'm a qualified bricklayer and have built a lot of buildings before coming to uni, but I had to go to TAFE and learn computers and do all that, which is just second nature to us here. But once you get into practice, that's, you may not learn more in practice that stuff than what you do here. So it's a massive benefit. What you do here is counting towards something. It's really important.
Here, one of the comments, there were two comments by two people who weren't architects, and they were historians or art critics. And one of them was about a historian, this bald-looking guy, if you guys remember.
Kenneth Franklin.
Maybe I didn't recall his name, didn't write it down either. And he said that he thinks that in architecture school, especially in the first 2 years, the school should be less about presenting and more about the drawings. So it should be less a sales pitch, What are your thoughts on that? Do you agree with it? Or?
I think crits are an important part of education. I don't think it needs to be occurring all the time. I mean, there was an interesting thing. Someone said that architecture is about solving the problems of tomorrow. Well, the problems of tomorrow are not the same as the problems that were of the tomorrow 100 years ago. Yet we're still using the same education system of 100 years ago, as if we're training people to do the same thing. And I think what architects do now bears almost no resemblance to what architects did 100 years ago. You know, the roles and responsibilities and things architects do are very different. There's a whole bunch of other people around them who do different things. So I think education needs to be different. I think the role of the crit is perhaps less important now than it was a long time ago, but it's culturally something we do as part of what we would call the signature pedagogy of design education, which is the kind of the normal way we teach architecture is in studio with crits. So I think the idea of teaching students to present work with a sales pitch is counterproductive to engaging in a more community-based way of thinking about education. You know, less about me and my idea, but more about a kind of a group, genuine studio attitude to what's happening. So I think there are times when students do need to learn to stand up and present their ideas. I don't think it needs to be as powerful a part as perhaps we still do it.
Performing with dance is the future.
I don't agree with either of you. I don't think performance with dance is going to be very helpful.
Or the concept of it. What about that one?
Yeah.
So,
The panel should ask questions. Those were the words. Paraphrasing the words that he said. And I wrote that and just wrote no next to it because I think I really don't agree with that at all. I think that for those of you who know, before I came to QT, I was working as a practicing architect here in Brisbane, and I have never ever pinned up drawings and sat down and just let the client ask questions. The sales pitch and actually marketing yourself and promoting your work is a very, very big part of what we do as architects. And I think that the environment that we provide in the studio, where we actually coach you through a scaffolded, safe, maybe bubble-wrapped experience of actually teaching you that is a very, very important part of becoming an architect. And I agree with Phil that we don't necessarily always have to do the same thing in every single studio, and I think we should be innovating and experimenting and trying different things. But I think that is an important part of your learning. There is a time when you do need to sit back and the client will ask questions, and I think that you need to learn to respond to those as well and be able to think on your feet. But a big message, or a key message of what came out of that was when they were talking about criticism, there was this perception criticism always has to be negative, which I don't agree with at all. I think criticism can be very positive as well. So I think that was a bit flawed the way that was portrayed. Is head of school waving his hands?
Great, so moving forward on projects comes from not only just your crits, but actually discussing and working with your fellow architecture schoolmates or university friends, I guess. And I think that there is so much that happens outside of your studio time and outside of your crits. And I think that, you know, possibly maybe QT is lacking that bit, and I think that's I'm hoping that when the upgrades to the building, our D block are done, there'll be spaces for this to happen more. But you know, I really encourage students to hang around and to actually sort of bounce ideas off each other. It's almost as if, and I've sort of seen this within studios and crits, it's like, if this is my idea and I don't want anyone else to see it and steal it, and I think that that's actually not a very constructive way to work at all. And I think that we should all be so much more open with what we're designing, what we're doing, and getting as much feedback as we can, not only from staff members, but from our fellow students, and having these little discussions and debates outside of studio or even in studio within students, or between students. I think that's something that is something that, you know, is missing a bit here. And I mean, I'd like to just ask the staff members here, how do you think that that's something that's missing, and do you think there are some ways that we can sort of increase that?
Well, imperative in architectural education to create star architects. And I know that as a design educator here at QT, that's certainly not my pedagogical imperative at all. And I think that there was a very, very limited perspective in terms of how they actually portrayed what the importance of studying architecture is all about. And I think that here at QT, I think that we have a much broader perception and approach to those sorts of things. And I think, you know, things that like focusing on humanitarian design or looking at ethics and looking at sustainability, those sorts of issues, we've barely even touched on, and it was all about the big kind of glamour of the star architect. And I think also what was interesting was it was very much just about the student's point of view, and it didn't really talk about relationships. And I think relationships is a very important part of the studio, and the relationships that students have with their tutors and with their lecturers and with each other. And I felt that didn't really come through, and so I think that was quite limiting as well, because I think that's a big part of the driver and how students can be motivated and how they can respond.